Kentucky coaching carousel perspective. Because, and this is interesting now, for the first time since 2009, Kentucky is set to hire a basketball coach. But I think what is important to note on this is that remember, they don't know John Calipari anything. So anytime there's a coaching, availability, right? The question becomes a couple fold. It becomes one, do you have to pay the last guy? Because if you have to pay the last guy, then sometimes you can't go out and get the guy you want. I gave the example when Wes was on with us, but Ohio State paid Chris Holtmann $14 million to go away. And so because of it, all of a sudden, you do not yet have the opportunity to pay the new head coach everything that you want because you're paying him $14 million to go away or $7 million or $10 million or whatever. Well, by John Calipari leaving, as the chat points out, you save $33 million by not firing him, but you also don't have to pay any sort of buyout, whether it's this year, next year, whatever. So in theory, the pool for Kentucky candidates should be through the roof. So let's talk about a couple Kentucky coaching candidates here right now this second. And this segment, by the way, was started by Jacob Petruzzi, who asked, is there any chance that Dan Hurley will leave for Kentucky? What I can tell you is, again, this is the gift of being at the Final Four, and this is the gift of UConn being at the Final Four. Because I actually asked somebody at UConn that would know these things. I said, hey, just out of curiosity, do you know Dan Hurley's buyout at Kentucky? And he said, I do. And I said, what is it? Hold on one second. Okay, so at the Final Four, saw a high-level UConn person, obviously can't share who it is. And I said, do you know Dan Hurley's buyout? And he started laughing at me. And he says, and he starts laughing. He says, why are you asking? I said, well, it's because, by the way, I got these Kentucky fans in my mentions every time Calipari loses a game saying we're coming after Dan Hurley. What I will tell you is Dan Hurley signed an extension. He is, I believe, the 6th highest paid coach in college basketball this season. Won his buyout. Now listen, it can be written in a big check. It's about $7.5 million. But what I will tell you is long before anybody thought John Calipari was leaving Kentucky this year, it has been in the works that Dan Hurley is going to get a very nice extension as well at UConn. And so listen, because you don't have to pay Calipari anything, I am here to tell you, you can't say no. You can't say it's impossible, right? You can't say that it's impossible because if the buyout is around $7.58 million, that's a check that high-level boosters can write. But at the same time, is Dan Hurley going to leave after a second straight national championship? I don't think so. And by the way, he's going to get a new contract with a much bigger buyout that does make it basically impossible. And I can't put a number on that. I can't even take a guess as to what that number would be, but it ain't going to be 7.5 million. I can tell you that right now. So I don't think Dan Hurley is on the table. Nate Oates. Nate Oates is an interesting one because, and I've had a couple Alabama people hit me up. Let me see if we can find details on Nate Oates' new contract. Now, I apologize that this is a little scattered, but the bottom line is I'm just trying to do this in real time. So Nate Oates just this month signed a contract extension that by the time it's done will pay him $7.5 million. Okay. His new buyout is $18 million. So listen, what I would tell you is I think if that contract extension had not been signed and the buyout was in that $7-9 million range, I think that Nate Oates would be the number one phone call. By the way, I've been saying for 3 years that I think Nate Oates should be the number one phone call. And so why I bring it up is I just don't think he's on the table anymore. I just don't think that he is on the table because I don't think 18 million, I just don't think you can pay. I think Nate Oates is happy. By the way, it's worth noting. He has an extension. By the way, shout out. I think one of my Alabama media friends is watching right now. So shout out Drew DeArmond. If you're watching, Drew DeArmond just texted me the details of the Nate Oates buyout. It is in fact $18 million. So listen, Alabama fans, I can't say you should sleep totally well, but a couple things. One, $18 million is a lot. Then you got to pay Nate Oates probably 7, 8, 9 a year. Then you got to pay for a staff. Then you got to worry about NIL. That one does not feel realistic to me. Maybe a month ago, when Calipari lost that game to Gonzaga, and I said, who would you go get? Nate Oates was the number one call. Now, that's probably not going to happen. I should mention, by the way, the big names that I do think Mitch Barnhart has to make a phone call to. And we've talked about these names before. I do think Jay Wright is a phone call you have to make. And you can't sit there and say he'll never coach again. He probably won't. But a couple things. First of all, he's called a couple games for CBS over the last couple years. And so he knows how great that Kentucky job is, how much John Calipari had to work with. And it's kind of worth noting too. And remember, we talked about this. John Calipari, he was kind of critical of Cal after the after the loss to Oakland. And he kind of said, look, I love Cal, but you can't keep doing it this way. And it kind of sounded to me like, oh, by the way, I think I could do this better than you, Coach Cal. And so with Jay Wright, listen, I don't think he's going to say yes, but remember, there's no buyout for Jay Wright. And there's no buyout for Cal. So you don't owe Cal $8, $10, $12 million. And then, oh, by the way, you don't owe Jay Wright anything to get him out of a contract because he doesn't have one. And so you can make the Godfather offer to Jay Wright. You can offer Jay Wright the contract that nobody else can or nobody else would. And I'll tell you what I would do. I would get all my big boosters, the Crafts and whoever. I know Joe Kraft is a big booster. And by the way, I wouldn't even get the boosters together. You know what I would do? I would do what Rick George did at Colorado when he hired Deion Sanders. We've talked about this before. Remember when he hired Rick George hired Deion Sanders, and at the introductory press conference, they told you what Deion Sanders' salary was going to be? And what did Rick George say? He was asked about, Rick George was asked about how are you going to get this money? Where are you going to get this money from? Rick George says, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. And I'm pretty sure you can like Deion Sanders or hate him, but you get the guy you want, and then you figure out the money later if it's a person the caliber of Jay Wright. And so listen, this is going to take, you know what it's going to take for Mitch Barnhart, the AD, and I don't know if he has it, and there's a lot of Kentucky fans in the comments that are commenting right now. It's going to take some big you-know-what energy to get this done. I'm not saying that Jay Wright is going to take the job. What I am saying is you have to put a contract in front of him that is so absurd that he at least has to think about it. I've said it before. If I was an AD, and I know I'm not, 10 years, $100 million. That's it. 10 years, $100 million. $10 million a year for 10 years for a decade. You are here for as long as you want to be. And we'll figure out the money later, and we'll figure out the details later, and we'll figure out NIL later, and whatever. And so, yeah, that's the call that I would make. Dan Hurley, I don't believe is coming. Nate Oates, I don't believe you can get him out of the contract. You can get Jay Wright right now. And so why isn't that the call you make? By the way, you know who else gets that same call with that same contract who's probably going to say no, but you got to make the call anyway because you're freaking Kentucky and you should be going after the biggest names in college basketball? Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens should absolutely get that call. Brad Stevens should absolutely get that call because Brad Stevens is an elite basketball coach. And I think you could look at it as a negative and say, would he want to deal with the NIL portal era? He's in the NBA. He's dealing with professionals anyway. College basketball is just professional basketball on a lower level right now. And so what you do, you get with him. You say, we're going to get a collective together, whatever. I know Kentucky just launched its collective. And listen, they're going to handle all the negotiations. You tell us who you want. We'll make sure it gets done. And that's how it works now. And it sucks. And you wish it wasn't like that. But that's how it works now. And so if I'm Mitch Barnhart, those are probably the first two calls I make. Jay Wright, say freaking no. Here's 10 years, $100 million. Here's the NIL pool. Here's your assistant coach's salary. You really want to sit behind a TV desk for the rest of your life? You're in your 60s. You're vibrant. You're handsome. Come be handsome in Lexington, baby. Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens is like 45. Let's see how old Brad Stevens is really quick. And I know I'm like totally off my rocker here. And I appreciate everybody who's with me here at 12:04 Eastern time. Brad Stevens is 47 years old, okay? Brad Stevens is 47 freaking years old right now. That guy's going to go just sit in an office in a cubicle for the rest of his life? No. You get in front of him. Listen, this is the Torres energy right now. One thing, I'm not great at everything. I can convince you of something. You listen to this show, I convince you all the time about something you weren't thinking about. Oh, I didn't think that could happen. I didn't think this could happen. I didn't think whatever. And then I get on here and it freaking happens. And so I bring it up because guess what? If I'm Mitch Barnhart, drink a cup of coffee, be ready to go and go in and say, Brad Stevens, you're 47 years old. You got 30 great years in this world. Are you going to go down? By the way, are you going to go down as the dude who never won a college title, never won an NBA title? Never, we're getting a new report. Give me a sec. We'll get back to that in a minute. But are you going to go down as the guy that never won a championship? You don't care. You're just going to go, you just walked 50, 60, 70, 80 years on this planet, on this big blue marble. What'd you accomplish? Oh, you made the finals one time. Who cares? Oh, you made a title game with Butler. Who cares? You lost. Come here, be part of the greatest tradition in the history of college basketball, and be the guy that we need right now. Brad Stevens is the name that I would absolutely call. And again, the Jay Wright thing, make him say no. The other names that I would call, first of all, I'll say this. Unpopular opinion. Chris Beard is clearly there for the taking. I mean, you just heard Wes Moore. By the way, I'm thinking about how I'm going to do this podcast tomorrow, piece it all together, because I have a national championship preview to share. And I don't even know what the heck is going on. All right, so let's keep it going. By the way, I just got a text from a UConn buddy. Is Hurley going to leave for Kentucky? All right, this is what I back to the coaching carousel. By the way, this is the most scattered segment that we're ever going to clip off on this YouTube channel. I apologize. So we've talked Nate Oates, we've talked Dan Hurley, we've talked Brad Stevens, we've talked Jay Wright. Who else? So Chris Beard. I'm a Chris Beard guy, okay? And Chris Beard, the thing about Chris Beard, I respect a few things about him. And I understand there's a lot of baggage. I know I just used the word respect, and I know that some people will not respect the decision if that's made. But he's won everywhere he goes, and he's won at places that it's not easy to win. He won at Little Rock. He won at Texas Tech. By the way, you could criticize whatever. He had Texas at #1 in the country a year ago when he was fired. Now, we know why he was fired. We know what he was accused of. We know charges were dropped. But at the end of the day, it doesn't freaking matter. It does not matter. What matters right now, what matters this second, is the fact that Chris Beard can be had. Arkansas should have had him. They didn't. Kentucky, you can go get him. Make it freaking happen. Bring him in. You will win. You will win at the highest level. And Chris Beard, to his credit, has the blueprint. He is the guy. He is the guy that knows what it's like to build a #1 team in the country, knows what it's like to recruit 5 stars, signed 2 5-star McDonald's All-Americans last year in his one full recruiting cycle at Texas, knows how to use the portal as well as anybody. Go get Chris Beard. And then finally, listen, I think the other name that everyone's going to float out is Scott Drew. I don't like it. I don't love it. But I do think that's a name that's out there. I understand he's a national championship winning head coach, okay? I get it. I guess my concern with Scott Drew, he's been at Baylor for a long time. And first of all, I've said this about Baylor. Now, the good thing about Scott Drew, he's going to bring VJ Edgecombe with him, who's one of the top 2 or 3 high school recruits in the country, okay? But at the same time, why I bring it up, why I'm not a huge Scott Drew guy, he's never faced a moment of real criticism or real, whatever you want to call it, at Baylor, okay? This is a guy that, took over an impossible job. And to get them to win the national championship was incredible. But, Baylor's not a fishbowl place like Kentucky is. Baylor's not a place where every move you make is analyzed and overanalyzed and thought about. And every recruit you contact has 10 reporters contacting them the next day to learn more about them. And so if I am Kentucky, I don't know that Scott Drew is a name that I love. I would much rather have Chris Beard, who has proven time and time again in the portal era that he can do it. Scott Drew, by the way, listen, that national championship team was incredible. But I've said this a few times. A couple things. One, if there's no pandemic, that team does not come back. Davion Mitchell was ready to declare. Jared Butler was ready to declare. And what ended up happening because of the pandemic, those guys, their season was canceled and they couldn't go through NBA draft workouts. And so all the guys that weren't quite sure what their draft status was, they couldn't get in front of teams. And so they all come back. They weren't going to come back. They do come back. The other thing with Scott Drew, he built that team in the 1-year sit-out era. So outside of Jared Butler, all those guys were 1-year sit-outs. Davion Mitchell, Maceo Teague, Chama Chachua, all the big guys. And so he did that, and he did it in an era that no longer exists. And so I like him, but listen, lost in the second round this year of the NCAA tournament. Lost in the second round last year of the NCAA tournament. I believe 3 years in a row he hasn't got out of the first weekend. So I am not a Scott Drew guy, not for Kentucky. Let's keep it going. I don't even know what kind of questions. Matt Painter, we got so many of these puppies. Listen, somebody said Pitino. All right, let's really talk about Pitino real quick, okay? I don't think he's coming. I don't know the contract numbers. I don't think anybody really knows the contract numbers because it's a private school, but he's in New York. It's where he wants to be. One thing I can tell you for sure about Pitino, when it was clear he was in his last year at Iona, okay, what's been known for a long time, he wanted a big-time job. He wanted one last run at the highest level of success, okay? Highest level of success. But I bring it up because you know what else happened? Is that he also said, I'm not living everywhere. Like Texas Tech, I believe, was the school that like tried to make a run at him. And he's like, respectfully, I'm not moving to Lubbock, Texas. I'm sorry, it ain't happening. Georgetown, there was rumors of interest. He's like, I don't want to be in DC. He wants to be in New York. He wants to be in Miami. Now, I get that he has the horse farms in Lexington. He's huge in horse racing, but I think he wants to be in New York. I think he's enjoying that rebuild. Now, if this happened a year from now and the NIL stuff is weird, and by the way, St. John's has raised their NIL. Mike Rapoli, the vitamin water guy, has pledged over $1 million in NIL if that's what it takes. So I just bring it up because I don't think Pitino is coming. So those are the Kentucky candidates. Listen, I'm telling you, I don't think Dan Hurley's realistic. I don't think Nate Oates is realistic. I do think Jay Wright, you want to make him think. I do think Brad Stevens, you want to make him think.